certified to different ISO standards. We've over 3 decades of experience doing this in relation to ISO 9000, 14000, the old 18001 standard, 22000, 27000 and 45000, which is of course the occupational health and safety standard. One thing you will note if you work with ISO standards is it's good at giving you the requirements, telling you what you need to do, but they can be light in detail and telling you and explaining to you how to do that. Okay, so you can get a few lines saying you need to do training, and it doesn't really tell you then exactly, it doesn't give you the tools in box as to how you're going to deliver that training. So that's what we're going to try to explain to you here in this short video. The concept of training means different things to different people. So for some people, training means to teach, okay? For others, it means to gain new skills, and for a lot of people, it means like continuing professional development within their own career. Training can also mean to learn new things for certain people. It might mean attending a workshop or to be coached by somebody else who's more knowledgeable to help you develop in your career. Ultimately, really, it's always about acquiring new knowledge and putting that new knowledge to good use inside in your company. The agenda of this little short course is to look at what the ISO 45001 standard wants us to do. We're going to then look at a 2-step approach for meeting the requirements of the standard, how we identify training needs and also how we manage training programs. We look at some type of metrics, and also we then look at some sample documentation that you could develop. So what does the ISO standard require you to do? Well, pretty simple in terms of what's on the piece of paper. There's 2 parts. Clause 7.2 is competence and clause 7.3 is awareness. So people who've worked with the standards over time might remember that initially the standard was training, awareness and competence, and then that changed around to competence, training and awareness, and now it's just competence and awareness. Okay, so training is, if you like, implied. It's implicit that you're going to do training. But what we have to do then is just, are we doing enough training? Are we doing the right type of training to make sure that people are competent and aware of the requirements, particularly within our health and safety system? So under this clause 7.2, it says that your organization needs to develop the necessary competence for your employees and ensure your employees are competent on the basis of appropriate education, experience and training. So the education, for example, might be a degree or a certificate or diploma. Training might be, they have to attend a certain recognized training course, and the experience might means they have to, before they get the role, have 3 or 5 years experience elsewhere in a similar role. So we have to decide what is it that we want in each of these roles. This means that the organization will need to have a process for determining necessary competence and then achieving it through training and other means. Under awareness, again, there's no point putting together a great management system and not bringing people with you on that journey. Okay, so when we put together safety systems, they're unique in that every single body has to participate for the safety system to work. If we look at it, then their contribution could be positive, okay, but their contribution can equally be very negative if they don't participate properly. So awareness is closely related to competence in the standards. Employees must be made aware of the health and safety policy and its contents, any current and future impacts that may affect their own tasks, and what their personal performance means to the occupational health and safety system and its objectives. And also the benefits of improved positive performance and what the implications are of poor performance as well. So we're going to improve safety, everybody will work better and is better for the company. However, if you don't participate, there are significant negatives as well. The next thing we look at here is, well, what should we do? Okay, how are we going to jump from those 2 short little paragraphs to actually being able to deliver a proper training management system? The key thing is, in this course, we're going to show you a simple 2-step approach. The first one is identifying the training needs. Where do we go? How do we identify what training has to be delivered? And then secondarily, we're going to look at how can we deliver the training courses once we have identified the training requirements. So when we come over here, we're going to look at, firstly, an organizational chart. So you typically might have an org chart with CEO or directors at the top. Underneath directors, maybe managers, and then supervisors and team leads and so forth. Within each of these roles, what we do have then is we have different responsibilities for these people, different expectations, and as part of their career, we expect them to be doing certain tasks. So we have to train, particularly new incumbents in the role, what it takes to perform this role and then help them along their career, their professional development route. The second one is we want to look at over here is develop a job specification for certain roles. So certain jobs in your organization will likely have a job specification. This might, for example, be for forklift truck operator. We have a job title and then a quick description of what a forklift driver does. And then we break that down, if you look in the form here, under education, experience and training. If you remember a while ago, we said competence is education, experience and training. So in this case, the education might be maybe a certificate or diploma, something like that. The experience might be, if you could think of this maybe before you even employ somebody, okay, if you look at this and say, well, to fill this role, you have to have this education, you have to have 3 to 5 years experience, and then under the training, some recognized training course. So this is just an example. There'll be more or less detail on this form for different jobs. But if we can split it out under education, experience and training, then that is keeping us on track for managing the competence. The next one is the versatility chart. So we want to make sure that we use versatility charts properly. But first and foremost, what are they? So in a particular department, you might have a lot of procedures. It's good that these procedures are documented, okay, maybe in the form of a standard operating procedure. And over here then, we also, across the x-axis, we can identify these training courses across the top. The next one under the y-axis is we want to identify, well, who are the employees in the department, okay? And we want to look at each of the employees in terms of what the training needs are. Now, it might have been a case that people had attended a training course, okay? But you can see the gap maybe that they had attended training, but would you still let them loose to operate certain machinery without some oversight from more experienced colleagues? So down below here, we're going to say, well, okay, what do they have? Does this employee have no knowledge at all for the particular procedure or task across the top? Have they got some basic knowledge, some experience, competent under supervision? Are they fully competent? So you notice here we're using circles, okay? So it could read 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The disadvantage of that, if we use 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it becomes quite like a Sudoku board, okay? So it's better, and our brain assimilates information better when we're actually using the circles. And 4 full circles, 4 dark circles means good. It's good. People are trained, they're fully competent, should I say. And 4 empty circles, 4 white circles means we've a bit of work to do yet for the person. If you look at this versatility chart as well, it gives you some good information as well in terms of that employee number 1 is obviously the most skilled in the department. Maybe just the certain procedure there at the top on row 3, we see there's 2 white circles. We have to arrange some training maybe for that person to fill those gaps. Employee number 6 might be the newest in the department, and we can see a lot of white circles there. So a lot of gaps, a lot of training maybe to be delivered here. What you should note though is that the training might be sending somebody on an external course. It might be running another internal course, or it could be just a case of sit by Nelly. You might sit the employee with a more experienced colleague for an hour, 2 hours a day, a week, a month, whatever period of time it takes, till you deem it necessary that the person has both the theoretical skills and the practical skills. And when they do, you just change the rating up to fully competent. The other bit that you might notice about the versatility chart here is that employee number 1, if they were sick, would then leave a big gap in the rest of the department because these other people don't have the same experience. And arguably, if you added them all up, you still have gaps, okay? So if an employee number 1 is absent on holidays or on sick leave, you don't have full coverage in your department. So you really need to be working, even though you have your procedures and you've done some theoretical training, you have to be working here on your skills matrices and versatility charts to get people up to fully competent across the board. Risk assessment is another great tool, okay? So it's a legal requirement in most countries in the world. You have to go identify the hazards like slips, trips and falls, manual handling, fire in the case of health and safety. We have to rate those hazards and how likely are they to occur and how severe would they be if they did occur. But finally, we have to then, in step 3, identify what controls are in place. So when we do a risk assessment, okay, we talk about, can we eliminate the hazard and substitute it? Can we engineer out the hazard? What admin controls might be in place, like procedures, records and signage. And finally, we come down to training, monitoring, and the last line defense is personal protective equipment. So you see, training is a control, and it's a very important control measure. Arguably, if you have a hazard, you see some degree of training over here for it. If you have training and you can't link it back to the hazard, you might question, do you need to do that training? So training, a hugely important control mechanism. So this is coming from a legal requirement, and there may be other legal requirements as well pertaining to your organization, which you'll typically get from the register legislation, ISO 45000, that might mandate other training courses as well. The next one is using accident reports, okay, to identify training needs. So if an accident has happened, there's likely have been an investigation. As part of that investigation, you've probably done some follow-up, and there will always be, at that case, the need to update the risk assessment and maybe to do some training for people, to not just the individuals concerned, but maybe other people, to stop this from happening again. So accident report investigation forms are a very good source of identified training needs. But equally, if we look at what the accident report investigation part feeds into, it's the emergency preparedness response section of the standard as well. So emergency preparedness is, how do we prepare for emergencies? And that would typically be like gas leaks, fires, spills, explosions. Okay, so you might identify them in the risk assessment. Okay, and if we have the risk assessment, we have training. So over here, we have an emergency response plan. We have to train people on the response. So if there's a fire, what to do. If there's a spill, the spill control. And all of these things lead to training requirements. And we have to make sure that we're delivering those training courses as well. So once we identify all the different training courses, there's a couple of things we need to be careful of then. We need to be able to show that once we have delivered a training course, are people still current within the training? For example, with manual handling, that might be valid for 3 years. So when somebody's within a 3-year window, we have the greens, and when they go beyond that period, it might be expired. Equally, then we have to look at the training courses. Is the training course for an individual planned in the future, or has it been already scheduled in the past, it's already complete, or was it scheduled in the past but somebody missed it for some reason? So there's lots of kind of variables that happen inside here, and what we want to do is have a good systems in place for keeping on top of our training management system. But at a simple level, once you have identified all the training requirements from the risk assessments, from your versatility charts and so forth, in the ideal world, in January, you sit down, you plan out the training over the next 12 years, and you then say, we're doing cert training in January, cert training in February, March, and you plan it out. People have to be released from work. You might have to bring in external trainers to deliver the actual training courses. So there's a bit of planning and work around that. So that's why we have a schedule, and you can put in the P for planned training and then change that to A for actual training at the end. When we are running our training courses, what we want to do over here then is make sure that we have course objectives for some, maybe not all courses, but for a lot of courses have an objective. So if we're doing something under chemical handling, what we can do is at the start of the day, the trainer can just put up on the board, we're doing training on chemical handling today, and at the end of it you're going to understand different chemical hazards, what a safety data sheet is, and how to properly handle a specific chemical. And the benefit of the company then should be identified as well, because the company is investing in this. It might be purely compliance, but generally there's other benefits too. So once we've that identified at the start of the day, that's important. We're going to come back to that in just a minute. We then want to move through and just get people to actually sign that they attended. Now, the one thing we can say, having audited lots of systems over the years, that a lot of people, when we talk about how to manage training programs, they go straight to just pulling out training records, the attendance record on the day. They're useful, but probably the biggest use is that it just tells you, that somebody had a pulse. That's all. Somebody was alive and they were able to sign a piece of paper on the day. A lot of the time, they don't give you a huge amount more information unless you have the rest of the factors that we're talking about here in this course. So you want to know, why is the training important? Did the person attend? And so forth. It's obviously important, but there's a whole lot of other factors. So we can come in here, we can get the people to attend, but we move on to the next slide then. And we want to say, again, in certain courses, we want to say, well, how was it? Okay, we'll ask the attendees, what did you think of it? So we could rate the course content. Was the level too complex? Or was it too simple? Could rate the location, the room, too hot, too cold, too bright, too dark, the heating, was that okay? So you can rate, and also the catering, the food and the number of breaks and so forth, and the facilities. But it's important as well with these to actually come in and rate the trainer. So was the trainer engaging with the group? Did they ask questions, and did they bring the group along with them? So if you do training and everybody comes in, you could have statements and people could strongly agree and strongly disagree, or you could have rate out of 5, whatever way you want to cite it. But at the end of the process, we want to be able to come in and look at the training and make sure that people were happy and that they got the benefit. If you find that everybody did, or the vast majority of it is, then that was successful. If you had a few outliers, you might have to talk to them separately and figure out why were they not happy with the course, and perhaps consider rescheduling. If you, however, have a lot of negative feedback on the course, people didn't think the content was any good and so forth, then you have to look at the trainer and maybe reschedule training with a different trainer. So you have to look at these forms and see what information it's given you and then act accordingly. We give one example in the handbook as well. It was just about maybe if you go around the company, you realize that people aren't wearing safety PPE, for example, in a certain area. And the risk assessments mandate that they wear, but people just aren't doing it. So you say, okay, we're going to train everybody. You take them through the risk assessments, you take them through the training, you explain the importance of it, you show types of PPE and how to wear it and store it. And then at the end of the day, people come, they evaluate the course and they give it a thumbs up, everything is good. If, however, you go back, and that's actually called a happy sheet evaluation, the on the day one. People had a change, they came out for a day with something different. If, however, we go back 3 months later and we find out that people, some of the people are again going to come back into old habits, beginning to not wear the personal protective equipment, and maybe 6 months later we're back to square one where we started, you have to look at these forms and say, well, okay, was the training course any good to begin with? And you can go back and look at these evaluations. And that's why it's handy. If you come back and say, well, actually, training course was good and pretty good evaluations overall, well, what else has got wrong? And that's where we might be able to come in and say, well, okay, the company has decided we have to do the courses, the employees have to attend and they've given good feedback. Maybe it's the management layer in between, the supervisor layer, that's been squeezed a lot. And there might be different challenges for you in the organization there, because if we're not supervising properly afterwards as well, that's where maybe standards can fall too. So what type of metrics can we pull from the courses? Well, some of the ones might be, as I said, when you start in January, you have so many courses planned for the year, like 20, and you have P's next to them planned. And then as you go through the year, you can change that to 8 actual. And hopefully at the end of the year, you'll have 100% completion. But if you're ending up at 20%, 30%, 40% completion, then there's different questions to be answered. Maybe it might be budgetary, people can't be released, you're too busy, but you have to understand why. And if some of this training is critical, then you really need to figure out, and with senior management, make sure that the training gets done. Okay, how many training courses were cancelled and why? Okay, do you go back and analyze the courses? So you did 17, 3 weren't done. Do you actually look under the stone and get information as to why they weren't done? How many courses were delayed for different reasons? What courses are complete but some persons missed? So this will happen, it's life. So if you ran a course in some months back on manual handling, don't just think, okay, tick the box for everybody. You have to see, well, who missed it and how are we going to get these people back in? Because if there's a legal requirement, for example, in that case, to the training, you can't ignore them. They're now in the red, they've expired information, and we want to make sure that they receive training. For anybody who's missed it, training, perhaps they need to be rescheduled. And did the course deliver what was promised before the course? So look at your course evaluations and the feedback forms. Were there adequate resources allocated to managing the training? Okay, so again, we live in a busy world, and if you don't have a proper training management system, then there's a chance that training won't be managed properly. And finally, has training delivered a change in behavior and added value to your company? Are you getting bang for the buck? Are you getting return on your investment? Some of the documentation you can consider might be a training procedure, a job description form, versatility chart, a training plan document, a training record, training evaluation, post-training evaluation as well, maybe 3 and 6 months later. These are forms that we have available in the full course. This chapter of the course is just to do around competency and training. We have another different sections in the course, and that course is coming through shortly. So at the end, if you'd like to know more about the full course, please send us an email. We'll be delighted to send you on some information. The other thing we have as well is a health and safety manual. So typically when you put together systems, you have a hierarchy. You'd have a manual at the top, then you have procedures. Work instructions are kind of more specific documents, and then you'll have records, which are kind of evidence that the procedure is being followed, and then you might have registers, like a register legislation and so forth. So there's a hierarchy of documents, and again, we help companies go through there with templates that can be customized, but that do comply with ISO 45000. The next thing is that if you are like more information about the online course for ISO 45000, the complete toolkit, please contact us on checknetwork.com or send an email to dan@checknetwork.com. And if you like the software tool that we use there as well, that's a tool. We have different software products available, and that particular one is just for managing competency and training records as well. I'd like to thank you for your time. We would love to hear from you as well. Thanks a million.